Hey everybody, it is Dak here from the Ed Boys and welcome to my updated Rune Dragons guide. Rune Dragons are a great moneymaker that don't really take that much effort, but they do have pretty high requirements. A lot of players who make alt accounts for moneymakers decide to go for Rune Dragons since they're so easy to kill and they're very profitable. If you've watched my old guide, the majority of the updates in this guide are going to be gear and inventory related. The general fight on Rune Dragons has not really changed. I'll start this video with the requirements and recommended stats for fighting Rune Dragons. Afterwards, I'll talk about your gear and inventory setup options. Next, I'll discuss how to travel to Rune Dragons and what their mechanics look like. I'll go through a typical trip at the Rune Dragons, and finally, I'll get into the part that everybody likes the most, which is the loot. Like I mentioned already, Rune Dragons have some pretty hefty requirements. First of all, you need to complete the Dragon Slayer 2 quest to fight these, which is one of the hardest quests in the game. Rune Dragons are no joke. Since they're level 380 combat, you're going to need to be pretty strong to kill them. I suggest having 90 plus in each of your melee stats to grind these out, but if you're just trying to get a couple of kills for a Slayer task, for instance, you could definitely fight them with stats in like the 70s and 80s. Using range on these dragons is not very recommended, mostly because of how slow it's going to be, and for that reason, this is going to be a melee guide. It's also highly suggested to have 70 prayer and piety unlocked to speed up the kills by a whole lot. The rest of the recommendations all really land on gear and inventory, so we can move on to that section of the guide. Your gear setup is going to make a very big difference on how fast you kill the dragons. A lot of this suggested gear is very expensive, but I'll also be giving cheaper alternative options for broke players. Just keep in mind at the end of the video, during the loot section, when I show how much money you can make per hour, if you're wearing bad gear, you're not going to be making that much money. We shall begin with the helmet slot. If you're on task, you should definitely be wearing a Slayer helmet, or at least a black mask to get the bonus accuracy and damage from your task. I'm personally a fan of using the Justiciar helm on these bad boys, mostly because I somewhat AFK them and I need a bit of tank power in there. The newest best in slot melee helmet is the NADA'S Not Face Guard. This has a better offensive stat than any other helm for melee, but you are going to get beat up a little bit when you're in there too. Again, Rune Dragons are very strong. After that, we have the Serpentine helm. This is a little more expensive to use in the long run since it requires scales to charge, but it does have a higher strength bonus overall to the helm of NADA'S Not. That last helm does have a prayer bonus, which is nice, but it's not going to necessarily make it a better option than the Serpentine helm in my opinion. Next, we have the cape slot. The Infernal cape is the best melee cape in the game, but if you're as bad as me, you can easily stick to a fire cape. If you've yet to get your fire cape, but you've completed Dragon Slayer 2, I firstly suggest you go give Jad another try, because you could definitely get it done. But the RD cloak does have a good stab bonus, for which dragons are weak to. So the higher tier RD cloak you have, the better of a stab bonus you'll get from it, and it's really not a terrible cape. The best amulet for melee is the Amulet of Torture. Zenyte jewelry is very expensive, but tends to have some of the biggest jumps in stats from their predecessors gear-wise. Next, we have the Amulet of Fury. The Fury is pretty good for melee, so unlike for range when you're degrading from an Anguish to a Fury, for melee it's not as big of a downgrade. The Fury also has a prayer bonus, which is pretty nice, but overall the Torture is going to speed up your kills enough to make up for more than that prayer bonus. Worst case scenario, you could just wear an Amulet of Glory. There aren't that many options for your ammo slot when you're using melee. I suggest wearing a Blessing for some slight prayer bonus. If you've completed the Elite Koran Diaries, the RADA'S Blessing 4 does give a +2 prayer bonus instead of 1. This may not sound like a whole lot, but not that many upgrades will straight up double your stats, so that's kind of nice. The best melee weapon against any dragon is the coveted Dragon Hunter Lance. The Lance is very powerful and accurate, which is why it's so damn expensive. It's also one of the best updates in the game for Rune Dragon alts. The next best option you have is the Grazi Rapier, but at the time of making this video, the Rapier is more expensive than the Dragon Hunter Lance. I don't necessarily see the Grazi Rapier getting any cheaper than a Lance anytime soon, but crazier things have happened, so if by the time you're watching this, the Rapier happens to be more in your price range than the Lance, maybe that's your best option. Next, you've got the Zami Hasta, which is much cheaper than the other two options so far. This is one of the most common choices for players with a lower budget, since the Abyssal Dagger right after it is not that much cheaper, and it's going to be a lot slower in the long run. The best melee shield in the game is the AVERNIC Defender, followed by the Dragon Defender. Both of these are offensive shields. They're not necessarily going to tank a lot of damage, but they are going to speed up your kills a bit. If you're using a super anti-fire potion against these dragons, you don't need an anti-fire shield of any kind, but if you decide to use a dragon fire shield, it's really not a terrible idea because it has solid defensive stats, and you can just use regular extended anti-fire potions. The defender will make for faster kills again, but the dragon fire shield is a little more enticing for those who plan on multitasking while fighting these. If you just AFK too much in general, or maybe you have lower defense and you're just getting your ass kicked, the DFS doesn't hurt. The best in slot chestplate for melee is the BANDOS chestplate. I personally use the Justiciar chest since I AFK these a bit, and I go for that defensive bonus where I can get it for the most part. The next best tank chest would be a Barrows piece like Torag's or Darok's bodies. The fighter torso has the same strength bonus as the Bandos chest plate, making it just as fast for money making, but also it has no defensive bonuses, making it pretty weak, so you gotta pay attention to your health a lot and you might get some shorter trips. The Bandos Tassets are the best leg piece offensively for melee, but I still chose the Justiciar legs so that I can finish up the full Justiciar set, which gives you a very large defensive bonus and is kind of nice for AFKing a bit. The Varric skirt is your best tank option after the Justiciar leg guards. The best melee gloves in the game are Ferocious gloves. These have no defensive stats, which is a bit of a bummer, but in general you're not relying on your gloves to provide most of your defense. The next best option are Barrow's gloves, which require completing Recipe for Disaster. Not many players manage to do Dragon Slayer 2 and then can't get Recipe for Disaster done, but if for some reason you don't have Barrow's gloves, the next best option is to just work down the line of gloves from Recipe for Disaster. You have Dragon gloves, then Rune gloves and whatnot, and if you get down to Myth, those are just as good as wearing a combat bracelet. Insulated boots are basically required to fight these dragons. You could wear Primordial or Dragon boots, but they have an attack that shoots lightning at your feet and deals a lot of damage. You can generally run away from the attack, but you're still likely to get hit a few times, and if you're wearing insulated boots, this drastically lowers the amount of damage you take from the lightning attack. Finally, we have the ring slot. The best ring option here is the Berserker ring imbued. In fact, anytime that you're using a ring that can be imbued, so basically anything but the Brimstone ring, you should imbue it before you use it. The next best option is the Treasonous ring imbued, since it has a pretty good stab bonus. And a Ring of Suffering imbued is not a bad option, since it has really good defensive stats, and the recoil effect can make up for a little bit of that damage lost offensively. If you have any questions about gear, let me know in the comments section below, and I'll get back to you as soon as possible. Now let's go over the inventory quickly. I do bring a Dragon Warhammer as my spec weapon to try and lower the defense levels of the dragon a bit and speed up my kills. In the past, I've brought other items to help with the Warhammer accuracy, like a Dwarven helmet or the Tyrannical ring, but I find it really doesn't make enough of a difference to be worth it in the long run. If you can't afford a Warhammer, the Bandos Godsword isn't a bad option, but keep in mind it is a two-handed weapon, so if you're using an anti-dragon shield, this may not be a great option. Some players use Dragon Claws for bonus DPS. I personally like the bonus accuracy on the rest of the fight, as long as you get a hit from the Dragon Warhammer. Next, I've got a Divine Super Combat Potion. The Divine Potion keeps your stats raised over a full 5 minutes, rather than slowly lowering back to 0, which overall means more damage for you while you're fighting these. A regular Super Combat isn't a bad option, but if you have access to the Divine ones, I highly suggest using them. I use an extended super anti-fire since I'm not bringing an anti-dragon shield. If you do bring a shield to help with the dragon fire, you should still bring the extended version of a regular anti-fire so you don't have to sip as many times. If you're using the super anti-fires, it's a little more important to pay attention to those potions. The moment your potion goes out, you're in danger of taking a lot of damage. I bring 4 to 5 super restore potions with me. It can vary each trip how many potions I'm going to need, and it can obviously depend on your stats and gear too. I choose super restores over prayer potions because they give 1 more prayer point per sip without being that much more expensive. You overall will spend a little less money with prayer potions at the moment though. Towards the bottom of the inventory, I have a DIGSITE pendant. This is used to teleport to the Rune Dragons, and I'm going to talk about how to unlock that teleport more in a minute. I bring my max cape for bank teleports. It's basically a house teleport 2 to go heal up at my ornate pool. This can be replaced with actual house tabs if you have a decent player-owned home, or even a dueling ring to go to Castle Wars or Clan Wars whenever you need. The max cape also provides a Holy Wrench effect, but I don't suggest using an inventory space for that Holy Wrench, since you only bring a couple of potions per trip. It's not going to kill you if you're trying to save potions though to grab a Holy Wrench. The rest of the inventory is food. I choose anglerfish to get extra health per click, especially since I AFK, I'll often find myself with pretty low health. I gotta heal up pretty quickly, but I also choose not to fill the entire inventory. I'll often end up with too much food and not enough space, and I'll have to eat anglerfish without really needing the health just to pick up items. This can depend on how much tank gear you're wearing too. Obviously, with anything in this inventory, the amount you might bring is probably going to change for each player. You're going to be using the Lithcrin teleport for your travels to Rune Dragons, but if you haven't unlocked the teleport, I'll show you how to right now. Make sure you bring that DIGSITE pendant with you, which is what you use to teleport. If you've completed the Dragon Slayer 2 quest, then you've already been to Lithcrin before, which is the island that Rune Dragons live on. The boat to Lithcrin is on the western side of Fossil Island. Once you're there, you're headed to this building, and you're going downstairs. The first room is where you're going to appear when you teleport from your DIGSITE pendant. Keep going though down the only path. Eventually you're going to pass 2 gates. The one on the west has a bunch of adamant dragons, and the one on the east has a bunch of rune dragons. To unlock the teleport though, keep going past the gates and head to this strange machine. Use the DIGSITE pendant on the strange machine and it will add the Lithcrin teleport option to your pendant, and then any other pendant you make in the future should have that teleport option. The Rune Dragons do have a few different attacks that they can use. First of all, we have regular Dragon Fire, which is why we have the Super Anti-Fire Potion. They can use each attack style, the range attack looking like a small arrow, the magic attack looking like a burst of magic, and the melee attack is kind of like a bite. They have a couple of special attacks too. There's a different range attack which can hit through protect from range, and it will heal the dragon for a portion of the damage that it did. This attack is part of the reason that using melee is a little better than range. Melee gear tends to have insanely high range defense, so you don't take as much damage from this one, and the dragon doesn't heal as much. The other special attack was brought up earlier. They're going to fire some lightning at your feet, which is going to deal a little bit of damage over time as long as you're standing on the lightning. Unfortunately, just running away won't help you completely, as they will follow you for a few seconds, so you might have to run a couple of times, but it's pretty easy to dodge. This is really the only attack that you have to react to. You'll be protecting from magic, and you can't avoid any of the other hits, so you just have to eat when your health gets low. And if you're wearing insulated boots, the lightning attack's not even a huge deal. You can generally just tank it if you didn't feel like it, or if you happen to be looking away for a second. It's not going to kill you. Now let's take a look at a typical trip, which should be pretty quick. Teleport to Lithcrin and head down to the dragon's lair. I usually have my quick prayers set to protect from magic and piety. If you're not using a divine potion and you have preserve unlocked, then I suggest using that too. Don't forget to sip that combat potion, put on your special attack weapon, and head in. Anytime you have a special attack available, I would go ahead and use it, but I usually don't throw down a second Warhammer spec if I landed a first one. That initial 30% decrease in defense is going to do you enough justice as is. At this point, you really just have to eyeball your health here and there, especially if you went with tanky armor. It helps to outrun the lightning, but with insulated boots, it's not going to kill you on their own. Rune Dragons do have a pretty good max hit, so even with high defense, if they get a good accurate streak going, they could kill you quickly, but that doesn't happen very consistently. Even if you do die in here, you get way more time than you need to get your things back. You're not risking anything, and the teleport back in general is fast enough that you really don't lose that much time in terms of making profit. If you plan on multitasking these at all, you're probably going to want to get used to dying in here. It's going to happen here and there, no doubt. Once you fill an inventory with loot, you just bank teleport out, heal up, preferably at a POH portal, and then head on back. Keep in mind, if your inventory keeps filling up before you run out of supplies, you might want to start bringing less supplies to help with inv space. These trips are not that long in general, so often this might only add 1 kill per trip from a little tweak, but that can add up in profit in the long run. Now let's go ahead and get into the loot. Rune Dragons will always drop a Rune Bar and Dragon Bones. The Dragon Bones are remotely cheap compared to that Rune Bar, and many other drops from the Rune Dragons are pretty expensive, so often I ignore the bones unless I happen to have extra inv space and I'm out of food and I'm leaving anyway. But anytime that I pick up all the bones over the whole trip, I tend to have a shorter trip, and then half the bones in my inventory end up adding to 1 extra Rune Bar maybe. So I find skipping the Dragon Bones ends up being more kills per trip, more kills per hour, and just a little bit more money. They have a lot of valuable drops in the rune category that's not bars, including rune plate bodies, plate legs, warhammers, longswords, and whatnot, and some dragon drops like plate legs, plate skirts, and a med helm. The regular drops are worth a lot of money, but they do have a couple of expensive uniques too. First of all, at a 1 in 800 rate, they can drop dragon limbs. They've gotten a lot cheaper since my last video, unfortunately. They're a little under 3 mil, but it's still a nice bonus to get a quick 3 mil or so drop. They also have a dragon metal lump at a hefty 1 in 5,000 rate, which is much more rare than it is expensive. And finally, they can drop the draconic visage at a 1 in 8,000 rate, which is better than most dragons. The amount of dragons you kill per hour is going to depend on your gear and stats a lot, but I usually expect 45, maybe up to 50 with nearly max gear. Sometimes it'll be a lower depending on how much I'm AFKing, and if I added an infernal cape and an AVERNIC defender, we could talk a little bit faster rates, but in general, I would expect upwards of 1.4 mil an hour if you have all the right setup. Even with a Zami Hasta and less offensive gear, making a mil an hour here is not that difficult to do. So some of the responses I got from the old Rune Dragons guide were about how AFK Rune Dragons are, or if they were AFK at all. I do consider this to be a bit AFK in terms of a moneymaker, but that sounds kind of crazy when you see that they hit really hard, you got to eat high-level food and kind of pay attention, obviously. They're not really lengthy trips, so you'll be banking remotely often. Compared to something like fishing, this is clearly not that AFK. You can't get up and leave your computer for very long. You really can't get up and leave your computer at all. It's more about the ability to multitask while you do these. There's not really a mechanic at any point where these take your full focus, so it's easy to fight them in an alt while you play on a main. AFK doesn't even always have to be playing multiple accounts either. You could potentially do homework, watch a movie, cook some food. I don't know what you're doing, but you can multitask these pretty well. The idea is they really don't require your full attention. I believe that's everything I wanted to talk about when it came to Rune Dragons, everybody. If you got some useful information or you just enjoyed the video, be sure to like and subscribe for more content. If you still have any questions or some comments of your own about how to fight Rune Dragons, be sure to leave those in the comments section too, and I can get back to you as soon as possible. I also have a Twitch, a Twitter, and a Discord, which all links are in the description. I appreciate you all watching. I hope you enjoyed, and I'll see you next time.